So today we're so excited to be with Laurie, and now I'll do the surname. I will say it in French, Couture. I'm not sure if that's how it's said in American, but that's what I say.
That's
So
the
I'm
correct
very
way to say
happy.
it.
It's probably the correct way, but then, names, they're interesting. I'm happy to meet you here today. We've met online a while ago, but I walked the Camino, so I was a little not very much online. And now I feel today I can really get a good conversation. I know we have a lot of opinions in common. I can just read 1 or 2 pages about you and see that I have a sister here. So I'm very excited about this conversation that we're going to have today. And yeah, maybe we should just let you say a little bit about where you come from, who you are, and what your mission is.
Thank you both so much. It's just so great to finally get to meet you, not quite in person, but at least where we're all animated and in live.
Yeah.
Yes, you're correct. My name is Laurie A Couture. I will say it the French
Yeah.
way. My family says it every way from couture to couture. And the elders did say couture. So it's an amazing way, 3 different ways to say the name. I am a childhood developmental trauma and attachment specialist. I am the author of the new book, Nurturing and Empowering Our Sons. And my first book was Instead of Medicating and Punishing. So by trade, I was a licensed mental health counselor. I worked for, 15 years as a counselor, and I also had additional years of experience working in social services, juvenile justice, and education. And I am extremely passionate about attachment parenting and homeschooling, unschooling, relaxed homeschooling, and alternative education. I really want to see more and more children coming out of these toxic public schools. I unschooled my son through graduation. And I basically, early in my career, I went off the beaten path and I did all my own research, in addition to all of the in-service trainings and the CEU trainings that we had to do. So that is why I sort of went off in a very different direction than a lot of mental health professionals do. I also developed something called the Couture Protocol, or maybe Couture Protocol, that is basically a 12-dimensional system of working, of helping children heal from trauma. And one of the dimensions I will reveal is finding an educational environment that meets the child's needs.
Mm.
So in other words, get them out of the system that is harming them. So I'm so happy to be here. And, I think it's just amazing, especially this most recent trip that you took, that I got to actually look at the pictures and some of the video. So I got to kind of watch it happen with you and your family. So you guys are
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
I think so, I'm a professional as well. I'm a trained psychologist.
Yes.
And when you share your line of career, it's the line I backed out of,
Yeah.
basically, because I'm just amazed just with the little things that I know how could you survive
Yeah.
working in this environment, having the opinions that you have. I
Yeah.
think it might have destroyed me. I had many reasons to back out, not just that I think I couldn't do it, but I'm just I think it's amazing you survived it personally, but also, I mean, got to work with the methods that you believe in within this system. How did you pull that?
Yeah, it was hard because obviously in the beginning, when you're unlicensed, when you first get in there, you really have to do what your supervisor says. But then once you become a licensed clinician, and then I went off and I became EMDR certified, which is a trauma treatment that works with the limbic system, you have much more freedom when you are certified and you start researching all these other methods. You really have the freedom to be able to develop your own specialties and your own expertise. And it was a very hard system to survive. And I only did it. I only stayed as long as I did because number one, I had to put food on the table for my son. And number two, these kids that were coming in, it was like, I thought to myself, if I don't take them, then they're going to just end up with somebody who's giving them more of the system, more of the sick system. Even if some of these clinicians were really awesome people, they couldn't think outside the box, outside of the box of medication. And, you need to do what you're told in school. And just, for example, in the mental health field, baseline is that the child will be obedient to systems and do what they are told in school and at home. And for me, that's not what mental health is. What mental health is that the child is thriving on all dimensions of their existence, and that the family system is healthy, and that the child and family are securely attached or are healing that attachment, and that the child is living with passion and joy. If that's not happening, then baseline isn't good enough to me. So that's how I survived in the system, is that I had a lot of leeway to be able to go off and really work with families in a way that met children's needs. It wasn't easy. I was always considered a rogue. I never fit in. And of course, being on the autism spectrum, I had a lot of issues socially anyway that made it hard. I mean, I had a lot of my colleagues did respect me, and I did make friends, but I would say it was the colleagues that were very steeped in the old ways of doing things, the strict behavioral biochemical models. They had a hard time. I was very fortunate that I had some good supervisors that really believed in just, they trusted me, even if they didn't necessarily have the same strategies and opinions. They believed in me because they knew I was competent. So they kind of let me do what I did. But I really did struggle with the system, and especially, oh my gosh, especially when I would have to go into the schools, because I had to work with the schools for many, many years and it didn't matter if it was a preschool, a high school, an elementary school, middle school, or even say a so-called therapeutic school for at-risk kids. I really struggled in all of those systems. And because everything that I wanted for my client would be diametrically opposed to what they wanted. So yes, I think it was a good decision for you, Cecilia, to just get out of the system, because people like us, we don't thrive in that. And that's why I started a business, because it is so hard to thrive in that system. Doing some, individual group work where you can be independent, well, that's a little different. You can have your own niche, but working in community mental health, it's not something I want to have to ever go back to. I don't know if I'll have to, just financially, but
Yeah.
So you talk about it in the past tense because you quit that line of career or put it on hold to do something else.
Yes, I left the field. I've been out of the field since 2016. I took a sabbatical in 2016 to write my second book. And then tragically, in 2017, while I was writing the book on the sabbatical, my son Bryson died. And it was obviously I just had nothing in me to give. So I could not just emotionally go back. I have recently, so what I ended up doing is after I came off of the sabbatical, I took my side gig and I turned it into a full-scale consulting business, because I've had my consulting business as a side gig since 2010. But in 2020, it was amazing. It happened literally 1 month before the pandemic hit. I had two options on the table. There was a job I was going to take that was doing intakes and evaluations in an inner city. So basically, I wouldn't be seeing clients that I would keep. I would just be doing evaluations and then funneling them to the correct services. Or I had an opportunity where I could literally jump off into doing my side gig full time. And I had to weigh this, and I jumped and took the leap of faith. And thank God I did, because then a month later, when the pandemic hit, I would have lost that new job. and I would have been without income.
Yeah.
So I ended up having this contract, this big contract that ended up going off into different projects and getting me other contracts. But I just had a recent situation where couple of my contracts unexpectedly dried up. They were having financial issues, so they could not pay their vendors. And so now I am looking at supplementing my business with some outside work. And I have looked at maybe taking on some mental health clients with a group practice. And so that will be, for me, the first time in 7 years doing that. So, but this situation, if I, once I get started, it will be very different than community mental health, because basically, if the family is not a good fit for me, if they are not interested in alternative education and, then, they don't have to work with, hey, if school is working for the child, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we're working on other issues. Okay. But usually for me, we have to look at that education piece, because kids are spending 6 hours of their day sitting in a chair, tapping on tablets, writing out paperwork, and then they go home and there's more homework. And how can you say that that doesn't ruin a life? I mean,
it doesn't
how
make
can
any
you?
sense.
Yeah. I mean, when you've lost your child, when your child dies so young, you think to yourself, I thank my lucky stars every single day that I had those wonderful years with my son that we unschooled, because had he spent those years in public school, then he wouldn't have been living his life.
No.
And we wouldn't have had those times together. And now I've got these big, fat, thick portfolios of all these amazing adventures we had that year after year. I can look at them. They were our homeschool portfolios were huge. And I can look at all the adventures we had and know that my son got to live more in just the 13 years he was with me through adoption. He died at 23, but he came to me at 11. Yeah. He lived more in those 13 years than some people live into their 80s and 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't need to be said, but I'm of course very sorry for your loss. It is just overwhelming just to listen to it, even, and then to imagine living through it. It must be hell.
It is hell every day.
Every day, yeah. Something you said earlier made me think. I have a question I want to ask you about labelization culture. Where we put labels on children with different illnesses we say they have, and my take on it, and I might be wrong, absolutely, but sometimes when I look at it, I am seeing the parents and the system looking for an excuse for why they think a child is in a certain way. It's so much easier if you can say, oh, it's because they have diagnoses A, B, C, D, or E, instead of looking at the system.
Right.
Not saying there isn't real autism or real something else, but I just feel that almost everybody is getting labeled. But so what is your take on this, and how wrong am I on your personal scale?
I think you're very correct, Jesper, because basically that is the system. That is the mental health and educational system, is if the child isn't doing what is convenient for the adults, then you slap a label on them and you diagnose them. And then with that diagnosis, that you go into a behavioral biochemical way of controlling that child. If you say that they have something called ADHD, well, then you don't, as the adult, have to look at how your behavior and the environments you're putting them in is leading to those behaviors. But we understand, okay, those of us who are natural attachment parents and have unschooled our children, we understand that nature has a certain intent for young organisms, for children. And if those needs are not met, then children will not be at homeostasis, and they will start giving off what I call alarm signals. And those alarm signals are not disorders. Those are alarm signals saying, hey, mom and dad, something's not right here. Please help me. And nature puts those alarm signals into all living things to alert caretakers, the parents, to the fact that that environment is somehow not leading to homeostasis. And if you ignore the alarm signals, then that is going to get worse. And so, unfortunately, in our culture, we look at those alarm signals as behavioral problems, as emotional problems, as learning disabilities, and we medicate and we stamp it out, and we give kids these behavioral charts and level systems to tit for tat. If you do this, I'm going to give you this consequence, or if you do this, we'll give you this reward. So you manipulate the child's behavior to fit into the parent's wishes or the teacher's wishes or the system, whatever system they're in. And I have been able to see the worst of these systems because I have done work in juvenile justice, and I have done a lot of work in children's residential facilities. My son, before our adoption, was in at least two.
I don't know what that is, I think.
A residential facility?
Yeah. So that's
okay, so that's what a residential, it's a group home for kids who are in the foster care system.
Okay, I get it.
So basically, if children,
it was just a term I didn't know. I know what it is. I
yeah,
just didn't know
thank
the wording.
you.
Okay, gotcha.
Thank you for having me define that, because I'm so used to it. I forget that.
Might be because I'm from Europe and we use other terms here.
Well, speaking the business lingo,
true.
yes.
That's true, the business lingo. So basically what happens is if a child is in the foster care system, but their behavior is deemed to be too extreme for a foster parent to be able to handle, they are put into a group program, a group behavioral program called a residential facility. And basically, it's this rigid system where every moment is regimented, and the children are put on what's called a level system, where if they do X, Y, Z the way they're told, then they get put on a higher freedom level. And if they don't, then they get put on a lower level where their freedoms are taken away. Now, my son was in at least two of these. Now, I am being told by some people that knew him that he might have been in a third. I don't have record of that, but they're insisting that they visited him in a third. So these systems drive kids literally insane. And it's so much easier to be able to take a child and stamp them out and manipulate them than to look at your own behavior and say, you know what? I haven't been meeting their needs. I haven't been attentive to them. I haven't been listening to them. Whenever my son started acting out and it wasn't due to being triggered by his past trauma, I would look at myself and say, you know what? Maybe I've been so busy lately that I haven't been as engaged with him. And he knows that. I mean, my son would know if I was just yah-yahing him. And that did not work for Bryson. I had to be, and most of the time I was very engaged, but obviously as a single parent, I would be working into my reserves sometimes, but I would look at myself and say, you know what, I didn't handle that right. But see, the system doesn't want to do that because parents are being told, well, your child has a disorder, so you're off the hook. Your kid is diseased.
But there is this general problem of responsibility connected to the whole institutionalization of children, that parents, I think, live with the idea that the responsibility of the thriving of the child actually is not, it doesn't belong to the parents. They send them off to kindergarten, and I did that before I became smarter. And so I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm just looking at the whole mechanism of our modern world. And we have a life as parents where it's fairly normal to not feel responsible and in a way not be responsible because you were not there.
Exactly.
So parents, they co-parent with the state, basically. They co-parent with professionals, with schools. And so when there's something wrong, in a way, it makes sense that the first idea would not be, am I doing something wrong? The first idea would be to adjust the child or
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Adjust the child. Exactly, because,
it's
and
very
that's passed
confronting.
on.
But it is also not the parents' faults as such. It's very often when the kids in our society are not thriving, it's because they live inside a system that would drive anyone crazy.
That's right. That's right.
I mean,
they're literally, when you think about it, our poor kids in the industrialized culture. So this has actually been going on since the dawn of agriculture. This isn't a Western thing. This has been going on since we started planting food and putting our attention away from the kids and onto toiling. But in industrialized societies, you're absolutely right. It's that we have this belief that we co-parent with the school, and actually we're not even co-parenting, we're just sending them away. But when you think about it, our children spend most of their living, waking hours enduring distress, dysregulation. Their systems are not in homeostasis. In school, their physiological, their physical needs, their emotional needs, their social needs, none of that's being met. They can't be creative. They can't even get up and move when they want to. They are stuck. And we put them in that situation as early as preschool and daycare. Even infants are put in daycare, and they are sat in these seats, and they just have to sit there. They can't move. So we're in some cases, they're doing this as early as infancy. And then when these children start to act out in their teens, then, oh my God, the kid's bipolar. Oh, the kid's got ADHD. Oh my God,
Yeah. And even without putting a label on them, sometimes I understand why people find kids annoying, meaning that some of the children we see are on a public playground, or they're going to an excursion to a museum, and they are brats, to be honest.
Oh yeah, they're acting out.
They are acting out, and we've talked a lot about it. It's like, why is it? What is it that's happening? But what you're witnessing when you're looking at them is, here are they maybe half an hour of their life where they aren't being controlled.
Yes.
And that means but they don't have any normal self-control, because they do not know how to behave, not behave. That's not the word I like.
They don't know what they want to do.
They don't know
because they have no
experience. And you make a
just
great,
be able to scream.
Yes,
must be wonderful for them.
you know, you make a
to be
great
around
point about
these kind of kids. When I meet them, I'm like, ooh, I look forward to school start, so we get the museums back and the playgrounds back.
But you know, you make a really good point, Jesper, about that, because I know when I would bring my son places and his friends, they behave just naturally in a very respectful manner, because they didn't have just that half an hour of freedom. They were free all the time. So they weren't basically coming unglued finally. You make a good point that people have this idea, and I heard it a lot during the pandemic, of, oh, I could never homeschool because I can't even handle my kids during school vacation or summer vacation. Well, what they don't realize is that school vacation week or summer vacation is a detox period. Their kids are just falling out all over the place. They're basically coming out of an imprisoned state, and they're just exploding all over the place. So that's why you're seeing the annoying, bratty, as you said, Jesper, behavior, is because they're finally free. And it's almost like they're just the detox, the toxins are coming out, the emotional toxins. But when a child is actually in a homeschooling or unschooling situation, and they are free children, then you don't see that. You see a child that's in sync with what's around them. That doesn't mean that they're not children, that they don't get excited. My son was very hyperactive. He wanted to interact. You should have seen him in a grocery store. However, the point is that his behavior would be respectful. It would be in context to the situation. He wasn't just out of control. Like you see these school kids, they're punching each other, shoving each other. They're ripping leaves off the trees. They're using sticks to hit the trees. They're bullying kids. They're calling names. And all of that those are nature's alarm signals. Those are children who are dysregulated. Those are children who are not thriving. And so what that behavior tells us is that those kids have a small, like you said, half an hour window to detox. Or in the case of school vacation, they've got 1 week and they're bored. You know why they're bored? Because they're so used to being told what to do, or they're so used to being on a screen that when they finally have freedom, they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't have time to be. Boredom is a self-directed tool that in a healthy situation can help a child say, what is it that I really want to explore right now? But a school child can't do that. Only the school kids that they have so many passions to begin with that you just can't stop their passion. Those kids can, who love to read. But it's interesting because my middle nephew, Aiden, who just graduated from high school, he said to me weeks before graduation, he says, Auntie, because I had, he had got all these new books and I had got him some books. And I says, have you been able to read that one book? And he says, Auntie, my school gets in the way of my reading. And he said that to me many times over the years. And I think to myself, isn't that horrible? Now, if he was, like I think of my son used to just like chow down books. He could read book after book after book. He just did whatever whatever he felt compelled to do, to explore, to study. If he wanted to get on his bike and go in the woods, he would. If he wanted to do a project, he would just do it. And it breaks my heart that these kids, they just have to sit there all day. And then when they're behaviorally acting out, they're the problem.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I have a quick one. Cecilia and I have talked about the word behave because we don't like it. It seems like other people want you to be in a certain way, but I've been sitting pondering about it, and I like the version of it where you talk about having your own being. I think I hope that's where it originally comes from, about how.
Behave.
Yeah, how do you have your own being as a person? That would be, I would love to.
Let's reverse it.
Let's reverse
In
it.
our language, behave, the word that people use equivalently, is the same word you would use when you perform a play.
Oh,
Interesting.
Yes, like acting. Yeah, like
yes.
I think of
so it's not exactly the word. We have another word for the entire show. Like, how is it to show
it's more like perform an act.
Yeah, it's like
perform.
or like, how does the child perform? And but that doesn't,
Yes.
some words can't translate, but it's just interesting because it's very clear in our language that this behave thing, it's not the person doing it. It's this facade, this mask, this role you take on, and then you do these things in order to show the world around you that you're doing right. But there's nothing authentic, there's nothing real, there's nothing passionate about it. And I think we have the same problem. It's the problem is everywhere, that the kids sorry, go on.
It used to break my heart because when my son first came to me, especially in those first few months, he just wore masks of who he thought I wanted him to be, because he was so scared of being rejected by another family, because he had been shuffled through the foster care system in multiple placements, multiple foster homes, and then those group homes. And so he was trying to act like the son he thought I would want. And so it took some time for me to help him detox so that he could be who he was. And it's interesting, if I watch some videotapes of him in those first 2, 3, 4 months, how, the almost ingenuine, I know that's not technically a word, but just there was a lot of him really putting on the mask of I'm trying to behave the way I think you want me to behave so that you'll love me and not reject me.
Yeah.
And that's what kids in school sort of have to do. They either have to decide, well, do I behave so I don't get in trouble at school and at home? Or do I not behave for the teacher, but I behave for my peers so that I get accepted from my peers? So either way, they've got to behave in some way so that either the adults accept them or the peers accept them, or maybe a little bit of both. And so they don't get to be authentic who they are. And that's the beauty of when I would attend homeschool groups or unschool conferences, is getting to see those kids for who they were and all those different diverse personalities that you would see. And the kids never stopped running around. It didn't matter if they were 8 or 19 years old, they were just running around and always busy. But yet, if there was a sort of quiet sit down activity, it was amazing how they could all do it.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah.
Because they were self-directed. They wanted to do it. And that was something that was so amazing to watch. At the same time as outside, in my outside work, I would be watching kids behaving completely differently. Is that word again?
Yeah. I want to scroll back a little bit to when we talked about vacations and parents saying, you know, I can't even handle my kids even over the weekend. Because I know another concept that you are passionate about is the attachment. And to me, when I hear parents say, oh, I could never homeschool because I can't stand my children through 2 weeks of vacation, I just need a break. And I think the major problem is that there are some real issues with attachment when we send our kids away. And this can be very judgmental, the way many people feel they really have to. And I respect that they feel they have to send their kids to school because they have to work or for whatever reason. But the attachment, I would like to hear you talk a little bit about that, what it is, and can it be saved in a conventional lifestyle, and how do we cope with the problems that arise when if we decide to co-parent with professionals?
Yes, this Cecilia, that's a amazing. It's an amazing point because you really can't have a secure attachment to in the same way that nature intended and send your children away at the same time. Now, I know there's people that are going to argue with that, but nature has a certain intent for every single organism, from the tiniest little, worms and insects and single-celled creatures to the lofty giant sequoia tree. Every single thing has a certain blueprint for it. Humans seem to think that children are different than that, and that anything goes, that there's no one right way to parent. Well, I hate to say, but nature's not open to negotiation. So nature says that there is a specific cycle that all mammals need to be on when they are young. And that is what we call the mammal attachment cycle. So it is actually in my book, my most recent book, I have both books have it, but I have a much more detailed one in my new book about the human attachment cycle. And it starts this way. So picture a circle. If you have a minute, I can actually draw it out for you.
Yeah,
we do.
But please, if you can put words enough on it so that the people just listening can follow along. Sure. And the rest, I hope they jump into YouTube. And we put it in the show notes as well. Yeah.
Can you mail it to me afterwards, the drawing?
I can, sure.
And I can put it in the show notes for those who are only listening.
So I'm going to draw. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a few different colors so you can see this. Just give me 1 second here. This reminds me of Picture Pages when I was a little kid, this TV show where they were always drawing. Okay, so here's the circle here, okay? And if you notice, it's got 4 quadrants.
So a circle with 4 quadrants. I'm in.
Okay, so I'm just going to write a couple words here. Just
We're hanging
okay.
on. Not that busy.
So when a child has a need, okay, this need can be any need. It could be a physical need, an emotional need, a social need, some sort of a need. I mean, need for love. The child will.
Oh, you're moving away from the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the child will have the need. I'll just have to cover my face here. Okay. And
Yep.
then when the child recognizes they have the need, they will express the need. So
Makes
in other
sense.
words, here they are no longer at homeostasis and they recognize that. So they express the need. Now here is the only part of this cycle where we can intervene. And what happens here is magical.
This is step 3 in the
This is
circle.
step 3.
It's at 6 o'clock for those who don't have video.
Parent meets the need as soon as possible and with sensitivity. So this is crucial because this is the only part of the cycle where we can intervene.
Okay.
And now the next quadrant is after we have met that need for the child or helped them meet that need, the child then feels homeostasis. And that means all systems inside and out feel good. The child is now regulated. And what happens is when the child is at homeostasis, they have feelings of safety. They feel good inside. They may feel happy and joyful. They feel trusting. And they just have a sense of feeling like they belong in the world, that, that their needs matter. And then what happens is that feeling is associated with the parent. And what we call that feeling over time is secure attachment.
Yeah.
Okay. But here's what happens with most children in our industrialized society, especially those children that are sent home, sent to school. So picture this, your child, let's say best case scenario, parent and child have a secure attachment from the start, but the parent is going to send the child to daycare or school. So in this case, the child has a need to be with the parent. The child expresses the need, but in this case, the parent does not meet the need, correct? The parent delays, denies, or just fails to meet the need.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen here? Is the child going to be at homeostasis?
No.
No. They're going to be dysregulated. So what that does is the dysregulation leads to emotions of panic, fear, anxiety, rage, lack of trust, and lack of safety. And then those feelings are associated with the parent. And what you now have is not secure attachment, but insecure or disrupted attachment. I actually have another one I drew out recently.
Yep.
And so basically, then it gets worse because this is not just a one-time thing. So the next time the child has a need, then what happens is that need, that previous need didn't go away. Then what happens is those needs kind of get backed up, almost like trains on a train track. If you picture this cycle being like a train track, well, then every time the child has a need, there's going to be a backup of all these trains, and it's going to be a twisted wreck. So all of those unmet needs congeal. So then at that point, some of those needs could actually become what they call big T's or big traumas. So I believe that insecure attachment is a trauma, but certain things become traumatic because the child is overwhelmed and unable to cope. And so therefore they dissociate because those emotions that we talked about of anxiety, panic, anger, lack of safety, lack of trust, those emotions become so overwhelming that the child goes inside and they dissociate. And that is when you have what's called developmental trauma.
Yeah.
And it's developmental trauma because it affects the child on every dimensional aspect of their development. So school is very serious when we send a child away. And this can even happen in high school. I mean, it can happen at any stage of childhood. It's not just the younger years. That is the misnomer. Like you're a trained psychologist. You understand that when we were early in the field, if they taught us attachment theory at all, it was always just infancy and maybe toddlerhood. But no, nature intends for this cycle to last for the entire childhood. And when it isn't, when parents decide, well, I'm not going to meet your needs anymore, then this is what results. So
do you think actually that maybe this goes on throughout life?
Yeah, I was about to say that because
But why is childhood? It's arbitrary in a way. So I'm the mother of a 24-year-old. I have
yes.
4 in total.
And a 24-year-old is still a kid.
She's still, but she still needs me to mother
She does.
her.
She's still a kid.
Obviously, in a very different way from when she was 2. But if I don't meet her needs for me as a mom, I'm still breaking the attachment. I'm still.
Well, that's because she's still an adolescent. She's not an adult. You're not
I
an
feel
adult
even
until
if
you're
my
like,
mom was alive,
oh, sure.
yeah, I would still need her to be my mom.
That's
And
right.
obviously, there's a lot that goes the other way when you're an adult. My mom would need me to take care of her, and it becomes more complex. But still, I think when we say it's just about childhood, I can't say that
adolescent
and young adulthood, maybe it's a lifelong relation that needs a secure attachment. And obviously, it's very much more important the younger the child is. And throughout the entire childhood, a secure attachment is the important part. And yet I did study it at university. It wasn't a secret. It was part of developmental psychology, but developmental psychology at University of Copenhagen also opened with this sentence. The first course we had the first year with developmental, the professor said, we're not discussing children outside of institutions because this doesn't exist. Wow. I was kind of ready to get up and leave, but that was like his premise. He said, I know you want to talk about this. 99% of all children are in institutions.
Yes, they are.
With children in reality. Children in reality has lived their life in institutions. You have, your children will, and this is the reality. It was heartbreaking, but we did study attachment theory. And a thing I've come across many times in my life after university is the layman version of attachment theory, where sometimes professionals inside the system, the school teachers, kindergarten teachers, they can say this child has too much attachment to the parent.
Yeah, because that's not, well, because they're using the word wrong. You either have a secure attachment or you have a disrupted attachment.
You can have a secure and insecure, disrupted. That's it. And the secure one is the good one. And the more, the better, the stronger, the better it is. There's nothing to negotiate here.
And like you said, ideally, the secure attachment relationship should last for life with your parents. So the reason it's so crucial for kids, like is because with children, it'll affect their development. Whereas if you're somebody 35 years old, your development is pretty set. So if your parents suddenly no longer attachment parenting, it's going to hurt, but it's not going to affect the blueprint for life the way it does with your kids. But at the same the same sentiment, it definitely will harm you and could cause a grief reaction, trauma. So yes, ideally, we want this attachment security throughout life, because what it does is the secure attachment with our parents sets the blueprint for all our relationships. And if we have an insecure attachment with our parents, then that means as adults, we're going to have to work to repair that to have healthy adult relationships.
Yeah. And also when we get our kids home for summer break, even when we get our kids home in the afternoon, after we send them off in the morning, attachment is the big underlying energy going on. Attachment is what you see happening when a kid has a tantrum in the supermarket.
That's right.
It's all the power of the need of a good,
The need.
solid, stable attachment happening right
Yes.
there. And maybe that little bar of chocolate is the symbol for this 2-year-old, and the mother having almost also a tantrum. I mean, I feel so sorry for these women in the supermarket. I'm really not being judgmental, but what I see is the energy of the pain of the parent who did something. We all know it's wrong. We feel it, and we're taught to not feel it or to ignore it.
That's
And
right.
the kids know it very clearly,
They
but
do.
they
They
know it
really know.
intuitively. They cannot speak
do.
academics about it. So they
Yes.
throw themselves on the floor and they scream
Yeah.
and they kick and they shout and they shout and they kick and they scream some more until they get at least get the chocolate bar. But what they
And really
need,
that chocolate bar or that toy or that item is the symbol to fill the void for the secure attachment. Kids that have secure attachments, if you read books like The Continuum Concept and you study Paleolithic tribes, kids in those tribes just did not throw tantrums because they were never in a state of not being at homeostasis. When they weren't at homeostasis, their parents or their grandparents or the people in the tribe immediately regulated them. They were not unparent. That's another problem that I see, that some parents that claim to be attachment parents go to the other extreme where they do unparenting, where they expect the child to raise themselves. No, children need us to meet their needs. You know, they need to know that they matter enough for us to parent them. They don't want to meet their own needs. Who wants to give themselves a hug?
no,
You know?
no. And also I find that children, as they grow up, mine are not so young anymore, so I'm not thinking about my own but when they are small, I like your little circular drawing. There's a need and they express the need, but it's not very precise. It's not like the child know exactly what they need. It's not like,
They usually don't. That's why, especially
they feel the disruption of the homeostasis.
They feel the disruption, and we have to put on the Sherlock Holmes hat and figure out what the expression is, because most kids can't say, hey, I need this. Babies cry. When they're crying, it's because they might not know the need, but they feel dysregulated. When kids don't, sometimes kids know, hey, I'm thirsty, and they can tell you what they need. But a lot of times teenagers, they're acting out by being sullen and moody, or they're punching their sibling. They don't know what they need. They're just acting it out. So this is why the expression, this is where we have to be the detective and figure out what is the unmet need.
There's when the child is Holmes going on there.
That's
when the child expresses, even to understand, is this an expression of a need, or what kind of discomfort is going on here? What am I looking for? I think that's one of the reasons it's can be so extremely stressful, especially to have your first child, but actually also especially to have your second child, because this is a new person, and I think it very much also
you thought you knew how they express themselves. It's like, oh, they do this.
I think you've got it, and then you realize after 10 seconds that the second child is another human being.
Completely different. That's right.
Story. And with babies, it's one story, but I think even with adoptees, it's a person. And you need to get to know this person, and you're running alongside this train. The train is going really fast, and you have to understand all of the mechanics, the direction, the everything about it while it's going on. So
while it's going,
and you're sleep deprived, and you just had a baby. It's crazy. You would understand why the mothers sometimes, when the dad comes home from work, would say, "Could you please, just for half an hour?" Because it's hard work to be this detective. Think about this.
But you know what though? But the thing is, mothers and fathers in peaceful tribal societies, had a whole community of
Yeah.
intergenerational family members around them. So it wasn't just the nuclear family. So that, and also keep this in mind, a securely attached child is going to be more regulated more of the time. So they're not going to be constantly spilling out all these, how do we figure out this expression? My son came with 11 years of trauma and unmet needs. So my son's expressions were coming out all over the place. And it was like, for one single mom, it was very difficult. You must have help if you're a single parent, you especially an adoptive parent. But even if you have a nuclear family with a mom and a dad, you really need those grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. I'm very involved with my nephews and niece. My sister was involved with my son. So my family, it's very important because in peaceful tribal societies, you had the family and you had the tribe and you had the community involved so that it wasn't just all on the parents to constantly figure out those needs. You had made a really good point, Cecilia, that it is not about blaming our parents or our grandparents, because this is a cycle that has gone on for hundreds of generations from the dawn of agriculture all through industrialization. And it's not about blaming. Everybody does the best they can with the culture that they live in. And our parents try their best. And we know that parents today are trying their best. But once we have this information, once we learn it, then it is upon us. It is now our responsibility to do what our children need. And because we're trying to do better with each generation, we want the next generation to do better than our generation. We want that cycle to keep improving humanity and raising our vibration. So it's not about blaming. We are not judging or blaming anyone. It's about saying, we now can get back on this cycle, the healthy cycle, so that it is secure attachment again. And that's how you do it, is you go back onto the cycle and you start meeting those needs. You start deciphering those needs. You start figuring those needs out and understanding that a lot of your adolescence acting out has to do with needs that were unmet in those first 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. I have a question, Laurie, because I'm sitting and thinking sometimes I get not tired, but unschoolers can be a little like, oh, this is the best solution. And I, in many ways, think it is. But when I look at your theory, what I see, and when I look at unschooling, is we who live full-time together with our children can see when they express a need. But not everybody wants to go down the road of unschooling or being a full-time parent or have the needs, the economic funds to do it. So how do you suggest parents who are listening to this and are saying, oh, she's not all wrong, it sounds kind of clever, I like that idea, but when you are not there to see the need because they might be in school, what should you do?
Well, first, Jesper, what I'm going to say is I found a way. It was not easy and it didn't happen overnight, to homeschool my son through graduation as a single working parent on a very, very, very tight budget. And how I did that was I did not see public school as an option. So it takes time. It took me a long time to come up with a plan, and I was able to find a beautiful child-centered private school to put my child in while I was figuring out that plan. But as you are making that plan, see, I want to move parents in the direction of make a plan rather than, oh, I can't do it. No, that's not acceptable. Once you understand this, we've got to make a plan. But while you're making that plan, you want to really try to focus on what is best for your child. So, for example, you can intervene with the teacher. You can call up that school and say, my child's not doing any homework, period. I don't bring chores to school for you to tell my child to do. Well, my child's home time is his or her home time. So there are some little things that you can do to try to help meet that child's need. you have to understand that your child at all times is having physical needs, they're having emotional needs, and they're having higher level needs for creativity and intellectual development, socializing, playing, moving. And knowing that, you can build a life around your child so that those needs are met. It's sometimes the simplest little thing of getting, unplugging the screens, because your child can't meet their needs if they can't stop themselves from engaging with the screen. So there are lots of little things that you can do, but I really feel strongly that parents really, your child has one childhood. To say that, well, I can't do it, you're basically cutting out all these opportunities and shutting doors before you even get started. So what you say is, I'm going to come up with a plan. And the plan's not going to happen overnight. It might take a couple of years, but work on that plan to get your child out of that system and into an educational environment. It doesn't have to be homeschooling, but an educational environment that's going to be more likely to meet these needs, so that you don't have these big red X's on the needs. There are now, ever since the pandemic, there's a brand new option that didn't exist before called learning pods. That's like a hybrid of school and a homeschool co-op put together is what that is. And so there are all these options now since the pandemic that didn't exist. And please don't think that the remote learning that your kid was doing during the pandemic is homeschooling. That's not homeschooling at all. All that was school over a laptop. That your child's school took your child hostage in your own home. That's what that was.
Yeah.
And you allowed it to happen. Yeah, you allowed it to happen. So that's what that was.
So I'm thinking one of the advice that I would give, I agree with you, this giving up style, I can't do it, is well, it's just giving up basically. Of course, there could be a way if it's more important. I remember saying to Jesper at one point, I'd rather live in my car than send my kids to school.
Send my kids to school.
I mean, it's a question of how important is this? And once you realize that, then there are many more options than, would be maybe forefront first time you think about it. But until the moment where you can actually set your child free, I think at least knowing what attachment is, how it works, and that there is a problem when you say goodbye to your child every morning and you're not around to see and meet the needs all day, and then you say hello again in the evening, realizing that the most important underlying stream under your family life is the attachment problem, and work with that. There's a lot that can be done in the moment of saying goodbye, and the whole idea talking about this is what we have to do a few more years. How can we make this for you? And also when you have the hours that you do have after work and school, how do you handle those hours? Make sure that the hurt attachment, the injured attachment is being, taped back together. And maybe we need a little oil or a little,
beautiful,
whatever. Look at that as the most important parental job. It's not very important to do yoga or fancy meals or Instagrammable kitchen
or
table.
homework.
Or homework
or screens.
Waste of time. Screens can be nice. I'm not against gaming and movies, but you could do it together. Then it's fun. Then it's time that you spend with your children. But at least recognize and realize this is important. Maybe even if the kids are a little older than 2 years, talk about, did you have a need at school that wasn't met? Was it uncomfortable? Were you cold, thirsty? Did you need to go to the bathroom, but you weren't allowed?
But the key is, but the key is the parent needs to intervene with that. Not just ask the question, oh, that's too bad, but okay, the parent gets on the phone with the teacher and advocates. So that's, I agree with everything you're saying about trying to do damage control while you're coming up with a plan. But the key is, part of that damage control is getting on that phone and letting that teacher know this is not acceptable and I won't allow it. So you're advocating for your child, and then your child's going to feel like he or she matters to you. His or her needs matter to you.
Yeah.
So yes, what happened at school today, and what needs weren't met, and helping them start to develop an internal sense of their needs. And the important part is you being their advocate. So when my child was when Bryson was at the private school, the child-centered private school for for that first 11 months, while he was placed with me before we legalized our adoption, I would stay very much in touch with what was going on. And I was advocating for him all the time. If they were saying he just refuses to do anything, I'd say, you know what? Just let him be. Just let him be. He's overwhelmed. And if you don't want a meltdown, just let him be. Just let him know you're there for him. Let him know you care about him, and let him know he can come to you. But that's not the time to be telling him he has to do his writing.
No. I think it's very nice you hold on to you hold on to come up with a plan.
I like that.
I just personally try to not end up in the more radical end of my radicalism.
Yeah.
Because I know that it's important that we also, you and I agree on so many levels.
Yeah.
It's easy. But we're doing this podcast to talk to those who are embarking on the journey of understanding what childhood is and why there are problems and what can they do to improve their life and the life of their children. And I don't want to only, preach for the choir.
Right.
We have to also give those who are just thinking about it, just wondering, could this be a thing? A walkable path. And I'll sit down and ponder on this, I think, later on in the sunset. How can we what would be milestones before you actually unschool, before you can, if you actually have a 4-year-old and your job is to be a nurse, you can't leave the 4-year-old alone for 10 hours at home.
That's right. So you need, the biggest thing that parents need is what I needed, whether you're, is your child needs a child care plan. Because I don't care even if they're older, let's say they're seniors in high school, it's not acceptable to leave that child every single day home alone, because, so there needs to be adults there. They need to be involved in activities. What we ended up doing over time is connecting with other homeschooling families. So those families could take my son when I was at work, and then if I wasn't working, I could trade the childcare. So that way there's this dynamic sense of a community around your child. So yes. And then my child, when he was older, my son did have some time by himself, so he could, work on some of his projects, but he was never just left alone for days at a time. That's not acceptable homeschooling. You need a plan. Obviously. Yeah, you need a plan.
You can, if you have to work 6 hours 3 times a week outside the home and your child is 15, you can do it and it will be responsible. You cannot do it when the child is 4.
Yeah. You have to also know your
and
laws.
I'll just sit down and think about, how do we, what would be a walkable path?
But I think the first step is, I liked your very wonderfully simple drawing that pointed out so well, what are you doing to address the needs and serve the needs that your children have? They might not have been able to express them in a wonderfully easy way to understand. And I think as parents, it could be interesting to ask yourself, okay, if my kid have been to school or in a kindergarten or whatever, what needs might they have during that day where I haven't been there that I could have addressed? And how can I make a dialogue with that child about it? And also often knowing that if you ask a child, how have your day been, they are not focusing and analyzing their day through. They are not. They're very much in the moment. So I think it's a good challenge for parents to figure out how can they make sure the needs are met, even though they are not there. We have talked a lot, but I would so I think it's kind of time to round up the podcast. But I also
Interesting question.
no, but you also have 2 books, and I would like you to tell a little about both of the books, and maybe from there lead into where people can find you also if they want to work together with you or learn from you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it Jesper or Jesper? I'm sorry.
Yes, all goes.
So
Yes,
Jesper in
goes. Okay.
Danish and Jasper in English.
yeah. all is good.
Okay, I like that. So people can find me on laurieacouture.com. I also have a Substack and a YouTube channel under those names, Laurie A Couture. My books are on Amazon or on Barnes and Nobles. You can get the beautiful, thick, full color paperback, which is very big. It's like a tome, my son would call it. Or you can get the PDF version for if you are on a tight budget of Nurturing and Empowering Our Sons. Basically, what Nurturing and Empowering Our Sons is about is it puts the focus on our sons, because boys are really withering and struggling in all areas and in all systems in our culture. So they're in every single system, from the medical institution, the legal institution, mental health, education, they are failing. And they're not failing because there's anything wrong with them, but it's because their needs are being starved to the point of death. And the suicide rates for boys and young men are terrible. 81% of youth suicides are boys and young men. And so what we do is I take parents by the hand, exploring what these unmet needs are. We explore how these are specific to boys, how some of the traumas that boys are facing in our culture that we don't even focus on. For example, sexual abuse and male genital mutilation. And we talk about what boys are going through in all of these different institutions in our society, including in the media and politically. And then at the end, the part 3 of the book, I take parents by the hand and we start filling those needs bit by bit by bit. I have a whole chapter on alternative education methods. And what I do is I grade each method according to nature's intent. So if you think that nature would give public school an F, well, then what would unschooling be for a grade? What would relaxed homeschooling be? What would a child-centered private school in the woods be? What would virtual schooling be? So I grade all of those, and I explain why nature would give it that grade. I discuss the pros and cons and when you may want to consider that method. So, and everything in that book, I spent 6 years on that book. Everything is about taking parents by the hand. So I tell people, please don't be intimidated by the giant size of the book. It's meant to be read in small little doses. Everything is broken up by small paragraphs. It's full color, pictures, graphics, illustrations. So that book is a deep dive into my nature's intent philosophy. My first book, instead of Medicating and Punishing, is a smaller overview of it and why our children act out and what to do instead of medicating and punishing.
Yeah. So if you should give parents to sons just a couple of advices on what to do with that weird thing that I'm part of. I'm a son, I'm a man. So how should you help your sons? And what because we are a wonderful, weird combination of a lot of power and emotions insides at the same time.
Well, thank you. I'm going to call you Jesper because I love that.
Yes.
I think that's great. That's beautiful. So we could do a whole show on this, but what I would say is your sons need just as much physical love and nurturance and affection at all ages into the 20s as your daughters do. Your sons and your daughters are just beautiful, wonderful creations of God, and they both need their needs met. It's not that your sons are stronger and they need less. No, in fact, the research shows that sons actually come into the world more needy and less strong. And that's why they tend to have more developmental issues like autism, because they have one Y chromosome and one X chromosome, whereas girls have two X's. And so boys that have a developmental disability on their X, they don't have a second X chromosome to cancel that out like girls do. So boys really come into the world at a disadvantage. And they are also very much attentive to the mother's facial expressions I think all through childhood, but especially in infancy. And if they see moms with a blank face, a depressed face, research shows that they are more likely to suffer depression and developmental damage than girls, because girls are able to seek it out. We don't know exactly why this is. It's just boys and girls are different. It is a falsehood that they are physiologically and neurologically the same. They're not. They're genetically different. But as children, boys and young men need that physical affection as much as girls do, and they need your love. And they especially need to have the secure attachment with the mom. They must have that. They need it with dad too. They need physical and an emotional nurturance from dad, and they need physical and emotional nurturance with mom. So I hear a lot of times dads like, oh, the little girl's my princess. Well, your son needs to be your prince.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's forget about the man up and be strong and boys don't cry. They need
exactly.
a lot of love and care.
They do. Just what I do is, cherish them all. I have it was my son, and then I have my two nephews and niece. My nephew's almost 23, one is 18, and my niece is going to be turning 14. And all four of those kids, they all are different personalities, and I just give of myself everything according to that child's personality. And you give them an abundance of physical affection and love. And that's what you do. You personalize it in a very nurturing way, but you don't say, well, that one needs less, than that one. Because they all need it, but you want to personalize your love for each child.
Absolutely.
That's a good last one.
It's a good one to say goodbye.
A very good option to think about whether we should do an entire show.
I would love to do an entire show on better parents to boys. That would be lovely.
That would be really cool.
I think we should that. So Laurie, it's time to thank you for your time. It has been a very big pleasure, and I know I walk away with things to ponder about on how I can become even better at this parenting game. So thanks a lot from my side. It was a pleasure.
It was nice to meet you. I almost say in real life, it feels like a very present and personal conversation. So there is a level up from Zoom, but this has been really nice. It
has been really nice. The
two of you
are
what you're doing.
Thank you.
It's nice to have some voices out there saying the truth.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a fun hour and few minutes, and I just I hope to get to meet you both in person someday, because I just feel such a connection.
I'm sure it will happen.
We will make it happen.
We travel.
Great. Oh,
thanks
good.
A lot for your time.
And you will love New England. You'll love New England.
Okay.
We will.
Let's look at the map.
Thank you for your time. And for people out there, go check out Laurie's work. It is worth it. And go read her books. I recommend them.
Show notes.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Take care.